Who is the biggest threat, a foreign entity to our country, either militarily or monetarily?
Well, there's no military threat to this country. Absolutely nothing. I mean, to propose and try to scare the American people into thinking that the Iraqis were about to attack us was ridiculous. And now they've done it with the Iranians, and now they've been proven wrong again. There was no weapon over there, no plans for a weapon, and the Russians aren't going to attack us, and nobody would dare attack us militarily. The greatest threat is financial. And the greatest threat at home is the attack on our personal privacy and our personal civil liberties in this era of post 9/11 and the war that's going on, and people are supposed to sacrifice their liberties. I would say the greatest threat from a foreign nation is financial. If the Chinese wanted to, with or without the Japanese or the Arabs, they could bring us to our knees overnight. They could just reject our dollar.
Water issues are huge all across Nevada, especially here. Some candidates are talking about a water policy for the West. Richardson's mentioned creating a Department of Water to monitor Western water issues. What is your view of how the federal government should...
With this department, would it be a state department?
I believe it's a federal department is what he's proposing.
Yeah. It is always much better to have more local government than the federal government. Sometimes you can't do it within one state, but if there's two states involved, there's no reason why two states can't have agreements. There are some occasions where, the federal government gets involved in dealing with rivers and water supply, but it really wasn't meant to be that people in one part of the country would be taxed to deal with economic problems in other parts of the country. So if it's outright taxation and promoting certain projects in another part of the country, especially when the government has no money, it wouldn't be the best way. I'd like to see this done more in a local or regional fashion.
You've advocated, from what I've read of your platforms, the scaling back of several portions of the federal government. What about local communities who depend on revenue sharing?
Yeah, and probably there isn't one single program that I criticize and want to get rid of. I don't have a transitional program. And for instance, even in monetary policy, I don't like the Federal Reserve, but I don't want to close it down in one day. There's ways you can have transitions, but there's a lot of domestic programs that we have more or less become dependent on. They've already taken our money, and there's the elderly are dependent on medical care. Those programs, I'm not even addressing that. Matter of fact, what I'm talking about will actually preserve them for a while longer. If we don't do anything, we won't be able to keep up with the cost of living increases to take care of these people. And the Medicare system, most people recognize it's bankrupt. But when it comes to revenue sharing, it's not something that I attack. If we did the things that we should do overseas, that's where I want to save the money. I want to change this notion that we have to run this empire, police the world, be on 700 bases around the world, 130 countries, fighting wars we don't need to fight. I'd save the money there and bring that money home. I'd close the bases down overseas and build our bases up here. I don't like closing bases down in this country. And that means some of this money that we save could go toward the deficit. At the same time, make sure nobody gets put out in the streets, and therefore, a revenue sharing program would fall into that category. And hopefully, we can get back to where the economy is vibrant enough that people will feel confident that they can finance these things locally. The other reason I argue for trying to preserve those is the money's already been taken from us. And some people think I'm inconsistent by arguing the case to get some of that money back, whether it's for the state or for a person's district. But it's already been taken. It's sort of like taking a tax credit. But ultimately, we shouldn't be taking this money out of the area and out of the cities. But once they take it and they set up these programs, I think we should do our very best to make them function the best we can.
Are you a gun owner?
I have some guns in the house, but I'm not truly a gun owner in the sense that I don't hunt and I don't use guns. But I spend all my time studying the Second Amendment, and I understand that thoroughly, and I spend all my effort protecting the Second Amendment because I understand it, but I just never got involved with guns.
regarding the waterboarding controversy in our presidential administration's policy towards torture or perceived torture. What are your opinions on that?
Well, if they don't think it's torture, we ought to let them practice it. Let them go through that. Anybody who votes for it and thinks it's not torture, they ought to be exposed to it. I think it's atrocious that they rationalize and do that. They call it enhanced interrogation technique instead of torture. 1984 newspaper. Oh, I think it's horrible. You know, the fact that we have these military commissions now, and that we as American citizens are subject to being declared enemy combatants and not have the right of habeas corpus and actually be tortured. That's the status we have today.
What's been the most egregious violation of the Constitution by the federal government in the last 20 years?
I think it's going to war without a declaration. Not one declaration since World War II. All these men killed, all this money spent, all the economic problems following this, all the injured veterans coming home, and today the veterans are being neglected. I saw one statistic, 25% of the people out on the street are veterans, and it's hard to get good medical care. And now, not only have we fought these undeclared wars, now we have, for our first time, really been the one that literally started the war, preemptively going into Iraq. So I would say that's the most distasteful violation of the Constitution, and it's not our president's fault alone, it's the Congress's fault. Congress is supposed to assume their responsibilities, that only Congress can send this country to war. They say, oh, if the president wants to, he can do it, and we'll provide the money, and we'll watch him do it. And there's a lot of other problems. There's monetary issues, and welfare issues, and judicial issues. But I really believe the war issue is the worst, because the consequence not only is economic and harm to our veterans. The other problem is that in the conditions of war, it's a lot easier to undermine liberty here at home. There was a famous statement by Randolph Bourne many years ago that said, war is the health of the state. And if you believe in liberty, you don't want a healthy state. You want to minimize the state. And the state becomes big and onerous. This is why the war issue is so important.
Our community has a very large veteran population. We're home to the Navy's Top Gun School via a Navy base out here. The federal government's role as far as taking care of its veterans.
A lot more funding, a lot more concern, a lot more consideration, a lot more prevention by not sending them to these no-win wars. I mean, just think of how long it took us to get treatment for Vietnam veterans for Agent Orange. It took us a long time to get treatment for people in the Persian Gulf War with Persian Gulf War syndrome. And I think right now we're already witnesses in the neglect of these the military coming back, head injuries, post-traumatic stress syndrome. I think I saw a statistic in this morning's paper that the greatest number of suicides by the military occurred this last month. And they've only, since they've been keeping statistics for the last 27 years. So there's an awful lot of neglect, and we should be concentrating on that. We call up these young men and women to go over there, and then they're neglected when they come home. Hundreds of thousands right now are applying for benefits, and they are having trouble even being heard at the Veterans Administration. So that to me is that's a responsibility we have, and we neglect it, and we do some things that we shouldn't be doing. You know, that uses up all these resources.